Hello, dear listener, and welcome to this quiet space we share, as the world outside begins to hush, and the gentle twilight invites us inward. Tonight, we'll embark on a journey, a very soft, contemplative exploration of a concept that has shaped human understanding, that has cradled our earliest thoughts, and continues to resonate deeply within us: the idea of myth. Take a slow, deep breath with me now, feeling the air fill your lungs, and then release it, letting go of any tension, any lingering thoughts from your day. Allow yourself to settle, to truly relax, as we delve into the profound depths of this ancient, yet ever-present, phenomenon. When we hear the word myth, in our everyday conversations, it often carries a particular connotation, doesn't it? It suggests something that isn't quite true, a mere fiction, a pleasant story perhaps, but ultimately an untruth. We might say, "Oh, that's just a myth," dismissing a popular misconception or a tall tale. But for those who dedicate their lives to understanding human societies, for scholars of folklore and anthropology, for philosophers grappling with the nature of belief and meaning, the term myth holds a vastly, profoundly different weight. For these thinkers, the veracity of a myth, whether it aligns with what we might call historical fact or scientific truth, is entirely, beautifully irrelevant to its definition. Imagine that for a moment. It's not about checking a fact box, it's about something far deeper. A myth is not judged by its literal accuracy, but by its function, by its role, by the deep, enduring meaning it carries within a society. It is a narrative, a story, yes, but one that plays a truly fundamental, foundational role in the intricate tapestry of a people's culture, their values, their very understanding of existence. Think of it like this: a child learns a lullaby. The words might speak of stars dancing or a moon smiling. We don't ask if stars literally dance, or if the moon possesses facial muscles. The truth of the lullaby lies not in its literal representation, but in the comfort it provides, the bond it creates, the sense of security it imparts. In a much grander, more complex way, myths function similarly for entire societies. Their truth is an existential truth, a cultural truth, a psychological truth, rather than an empirical one. These powerful narratives, these myths, are often embraced and endorsed not just by religious authorities, but also by secular institutions. They can describe events and beings that are natural, or more often, supernatural in their character. What is particularly fascinating is how many societies, especially those of the past, didn't draw the sharp distinctions we often do today between what we label myths, legends, and history. For them, these interwoven narratives, these stories of their remote past, were considered factual accounts. Not factual in a modern, scientific sense, perhaps, but factual in the sense that they provided the bedrock of their reality, the framework for their world. They weren't questioned as we might question a news report, they were simply known. They were the very fabric of how things came to be, and how things ought to be. Let's gently trace the journey of the word itself, a journey that reveals so much about our shifting understanding. The very word myth comes to us from the ancient Greek word mythos. Imagine that sound, mythos. It carried the simple, beautiful meanings of speech, narrative, or even fiction. And then, the Greeks combined mythos with the suffix logia, meaning study or storytelling, to create mythologia. This gave us a broader term for story or legends. In fact, the great philosopher Plato himself used mythologia quite generally, to refer to any kind of fiction or storytelling. So, at its very root, myth simply meant a spoken word, a narrative, a tale. There was no inherent judgment of truth or falsity. Merely the act of telling. As this Greek term traveled through time and across cultures, something subtle, yet profound, began to shift. It was borrowed into late Latin, appearing notably in the title of the 5th century work, Mythology, by a Latin author named Fabius Planciades Fulgentius. This work specifically explored what we now call classical mythology, the intricate, often dramatic stories of the Greco-Roman gods and their world-shaping deeds. Significantly, Fulgentius's mythology didn't treat these stories as literal, historical events. Instead, he explicitly understood them as allegories, as symbolic narratives requiring deep interpretation. He saw them not as historical records, but as vessels carrying deeper truths, much like a dream can carry profound meaning without being a literal prediction of the future. This Latin term then found its way into Middle French as mythology, and by the 15th century, English adopted the word, initially with a similar meaning. John Lydgate, in his Troy book around 1425, is among the first to attest to its use in English. Back then, mythology referred to the exposition of a myth or myths, the interpretation of fables, or a book containing such interpretations. For a long time, from Lydgate right up until the 17th or 18th century, mythology was understood to mean a moral, a fable, an allegory, a parable, or simply a collection of traditional stories that were generally understood to be false. Think about that shift. From the neutral speech or narrative of ancient Greece, to the allegorical interpretation of late antiquity, to a clear label of falsehood in medieval and early modern Europe. It's a testament to the changing epistemologies, the changing ways people defined what was true and what was story. It was a reflection of a world moving towards a more empirical, a more literal, understanding of truth. It's quite interesting to note that the English language absorbed mythology before it embraced myth. Even Johnson's dictionary, a landmark work, includes an entry for mythology, but not for myth itself. In fact, the direct Greek loanword mythos, and its plural mytha, and the Latinate mythus, with plural mythi, both appeared in English before our current, more common form, myth, which only really entered common usage around 1830. This slow, winding journey of a word, from an innocent story to a false story and back to a profound societal narrative, beautifully illustrates the complex dance between language, culture, and our evolving perceptions of truth. Now, let's turn our attention to the characters and the settings that populate these extraordinary narratives. The main characters in myths are rarely ordinary humans going about their daily lives. Oh no, they are usually beings of immense power and significance. We find gods, with their vast dominion over creation and destiny, demigods straddling the worlds of mortals and immortals, and a whole host of other supernatural figures, creatures, and forces. Sometimes, the protagonists can be humans, animals, or even intriguing combinations of both, but always, they are exceptional. They are not the everyday. This is a crucial distinction. Stories of ordinary humans, even if they are leaders or heroes, tend to fall into the category of legends rather than myths. Legends often have a glimmer of historical basis, even if highly embellished, and take place in a world recognizably similar to our own, though in the recent past. Myths, by contrast, lift us out of the mundane. They deal with these powerful, often divine figures. They typically have no historical basis in our conventional sense, and they are almost universally set in a primordial age, a time far, far removed from the present, a world that was utterly different from the one we inhabit today. This remote past is not simply a historical period, it is a foundational time, a time of beginnings, of shapings, a time when the very laws of existence were being established. Think about this primordial setting for a moment. It's a philosophical necessity for these narratives. How could the world be created by an ordinary human in a recognizable time? It couldn't. The creation of the cosmos, the establishment of fundamental order, the very genesis of life and consciousness, these require protagonists, and a setting that transcend the ordinary. Gods, with their boundless power and their timeless existence, are perfectly suited to these tasks. And the primordial age offers a canvas vast enough for such monumental events, a time before time, when anything was possible and all things were being laid down. Let's delve deeper into the types of myths we find across human societies, for each type serves a unique, indispensable function. First, and perhaps most universally, we encounter creation myths. These are the grand narratives that take us back to that primordial age, to a time when the world had not yet achieved its later, familiar form. These myths answer the most profound, the most ancient questions of human existence. Where did we come from? How did the heavens and the earth come to be? What was before? They speak of oceans of chaos, of divine beings fashioning worlds from clay, of cosmic eggs hatching the universe, of words spoken into the void, bringing forth light and life. Philosophically, creation myths are humanity's first attempts at cosmology. Before telescopes and particle accelerators, before complex mathematical equations, these stories offered a coherent, meaningful explanation for the sheer fact of existence. They provided a sense of origin, a narrative grounding for being. Scientifically, while they differ vastly in methodology and outcome, we can see a beautiful parallel with modern scientific cosmogonies, like the Big Bang Theory. Both are stories, in a sense, about how everything began. One is steeped in the sacred and symbolic, providing spiritual meaning and purpose. The other is built upon empirical observation and mathematical models, seeking verifiable physical laws. Yet both arise from the same fundamental human impulse, to understand our origins, to tell a story about where we came from. They fulfill a deep human need for coherence, for a narrative that places us within a larger, meaningful cosmos. Next, we have origin myths. These narratives, while sometimes overlapping with creation myths, explain how a society's specific customs, institutions, and taboos were established and sanctified. Why do we celebrate this festival? Why do we avoid eating that animal? Why is this particular social structure considered just? Origin myths provide the why behind the fundamental frameworks of social life. They tell of ancestors, heroes, or even gods, who in ancient times laid down the laws, performed the first ritual, or discovered the sacred way of doing things. By tracing these practices back to a divine or primordial source, the myths grant them immense authority and legitimacy. They become sacred, imbued with a power that transcends mere human invention. Philosophically, these myths are the foundations of a society's ethical and moral philosophy, its early political theory, its very social contract. They explain why things are the way they are, and why they should remain so. Anthropologically, they are vital tools for social cohesion, providing a shared understanding of norms and values, ensuring stability and continuity across generations. They transform arbitrary rules into sacred imperatives, making the fabric of society not just functional, but meaningful. And then, there are national myths. These are narratives about a nation's past that serve to symbolize and reinforce its core values. They tell stories of founding fathers, of heroic struggles, of defining moments that forged a collective identity. Think of narratives about national heroes, battles won against impossible odds, or the symbolic significance of a country's landscape. These myths are not always about ancient gods, but often about historical figures, elevated to mythical status, whose deeds embody the very spirit of the nation. They provide a shared memory, a collective heritage that binds people together, fostering a sense of belonging and common purpose. They teach citizens what it means to be a part of this nation, to uphold these values, to strive for these ideals. Philosophically, national myths contribute to the concept of collective consciousness, shaping a shared worldview and a sense of shared destiny. They demonstrate how narratives can forge and maintain identity on a grand scale, providing a powerful emotional and ideological anchor for millions. One of the most profound and fascinating aspects of myth is its intricate, inseparable relationship with ritual. The source text highlights this beautifully, noting a complex relationship between recital of myths and the enactment of rituals. Imagine these two as dancers, each complementing and giving meaning to the other. A myth often provides the narrative script, the divine precedent for a ritual. The ritual, in turn, is the physical, embodied enactment of that myth. It brings the timeless past of the myth into the immediate, lived present. Consider a creation myth. It tells of the world being formed from chaos. A ritual might then reenact aspects of that creation, perhaps a symbolic separation of elements, a procession, or a sacrifice, reminding participants of that foundational moment. The ritual isn't just a performance, it is a way of experiencing the myth, of making its truth palpable, concrete, and deeply personal. Through ritual, the primordial power of the myth is reactivated, brought into the now. It's a way for individuals and communities to connect with the sacred, to renew their understanding of the world, and to reaffirm their place within it. Philosophically, ritual is the active embodiment of belief, transforming abstract narrative into lived experience. It grounds the myth, moving it from the realm of story to the realm of sacred action. Scientifically, from an anthropological perspective, rituals are vital mechanisms for social cohesion, reinforcing shared values, solidifying group identity, and providing a powerful emotional outlet. They are the stage upon which the myth's lessons are not just heard, but felt, often in a communal setting that amplifies their power and meaning. The efficacy of ritual, its ability to achieve its practical ends, be it bountiful harvest, healing, or community well-being, is directly tied to the underlying myth that sanctifies it. Without the myth, the ritual might be a meaningless dance. Without the ritual, the myth might remain a distant tale. Together, they create a living, breathing system of meaning. Now, let's explore how scholars, with their calm, analytical gaze, have sought to define and understand this elusive yet omnipresent phenomenon. Definitions of myth vary, as one might expect for such a rich and multifaceted concept, but they all converge on core ideas. One widely cited definition comes from the Finnish folklorist Lauri Hanko. He describes myth as a story of the gods, a religious account of the beginning of the world, the creation, fundamental events, the exemplary deeds of the gods as a result of which the world, nature and culture were created together with all parts thereof and given their order, which still obtains. A myth expresses and confirms society's religious values and norms, it provides a pattern of behavior to be imitated, testifies to the efficacy of ritual with its practical ends and establishes the sanctity of cult. Let's gently unpack Hanko's words. He emphasizes the divine protagonists, story of the gods, and the cosmic scope, beginning of the world, the creation. He highlights the fundamental events and the exemplary deeds of these gods, which established the world's order, an order that Krusha Ly still obtains. This speaks to the enduring, foundational nature of myth. The order established in the mythical past is the order of the present. And perhaps most importantly, Hanko stresses the function of myth. It expresses and confirms society's religious values and norms. It's not just a story, it's a moral compass, a guide. It provides a pattern of behavior to be imitated, offering archetypal examples of how to live. And, as we just discussed, it testifies to the efficacy of ritual, and establishes the sanctity of cult. Hanko beautifully ties together the narrative, the divine, the origins, the social structure, the ethics, and the ritual practice, showing how myth is the unifying thread running through a culture's entire worldview. Philosophically, Hanko's definition points to myth as the primordial source of ethics and metaphysics for a society. Anthropologically, it is the fundamental blueprint for social reproduction and cultural identity. Another illuminating perspective comes from myth criticism theorist and Professor José Manuel Losada. From the viewpoint of cultural myth criticism, understanding myth requires looking from inside only as a myth. Losada defines myth as a functional, symbolic and thematic narrative of one or several extraordinary events with a transcendent, sacred and supernatural referent, that lacks, in principle, historical testimony, and that refers to an individual or collective, but always absolute, cosmogony or eschatology. Losada's definition echoes some of Hanko's points but adds a few key insights. He emphasizes the functional, symbolic and thematic nature of myth. It does something functional, it means something beyond the literal, symbolic, and it explores core ideas, thematic. He reiterates the idea of extraordinary events and transcendent, sacred and supernatural reference, taking us beyond the mundane. He clearly states its lack of historical testimony, in the conventional sense, affirming that its truth is of a different order. And significantly, Losada connects myth to cosmogony or eschatology. Cosmogonies are, as we discussed, stories of beginnings. Eschatologies are stories of ultimate ends, of the destiny of the world or humanity. Myths, therefore, provide a complete narrative arc for existence, from its genesis to its ultimate fate. And this scope, he states, is always absolute, encompassing the totality of experience. Philosophically, Losada highlights myth's role in addressing ultimate questions of meaning and purpose, grounding individual and collective experience within an absolute framework. Psychologically, it speaks to the human need for narratives that provide closure, both about our beginnings and our potential endings. Finally, while the text provides an incomplete definition from the holistic myth research by Assyriologist Annette Skoll and classic philologist Christian Skoll, the fragment we have is incredibly insightful. A myth can be defined as an Erzählstoff, narrative material, which is polymorphic through its variants and, depending on the variant, polystratic. Let's gently dwell on these fascinating terms, polymorphic and polystratic. Polymorphic means having many forms. This tells us that a myth is rarely a single, static story. Instead, it exists in numerous versions, variants, and retellings, adapting and evolving across time, place, and storyteller. Think of how a traditional tale might change slightly with each telling, each performance, each new generation. And polystratic means having many layers. This suggests that a myth is not a simple narrative with a single, clear meaning. Rather, it is rich with multiple layers of interpretation, resonating on different levels, perhaps a literal level, a moral level, a psychological level, an allegorical level, a cosmological level. The meaning isn't fixed, it's dynamic, unfolding, revealing itself differently depending on the context and the audience. Philosophically, this definition points to the dynamic, living nature of myth, reminding us that meaning is often fluid, emergent, and deeply context-dependent. Anthropologically, it highlights the adaptive capacity of cultural narratives, their ability to remain relevant by shifting form and depth of meaning over time. So, as we bring our gentle exploration to a close, let us reflect on the enduring power of myth. We've journeyed from the simple Greek word for speech to complex scholarly definitions, understanding that myth is far more than a false story. It is a profound genre of folklore, a narrative that underpins societies, shapes values, explains origins, and sanctifies practices. Philosophically, myths are humanity's oldest attempts at meaning-making. They wrestle with the most profound questions: creation, death, good, evil, destiny, the very nature of reality. They provide a coherence, a framework for understanding a world that is often chaotic and bewildering. They are not merely intellectual exercises. They are deeply felt, emotionally resonant narratives that speak to the heart as much as the mind, offering comfort, guidance, and a sense of belonging. They reveal our innate human need for story, for narrative structure to make sense of our fleeting existence. Scientifically, particularly through the lenses of anthropology, sociology, and psychology, myths are seen as cultural blueprints, as mirrors reflecting the collective psyche. They are powerful mechanisms for social cohesion, passing down accumulated wisdom, enforcing taboos, and reinforcing communal identity. Psychologically, figures like Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, universal, primordial images and patterns that reside in the collective unconscious, finding expression in myths across diverse cultures. These archetypes, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the great mother, resonate deeply within us because they tap into shared human experiences and needs. Myths, then, are not just external stories. They are internal landscapes, reflecting our deepest fears, our highest aspirations, and our fundamental understanding of human nature. In our modern world, with its emphasis on scientific truth and empirical evidence, it's easy to overlook the quiet power of myth. But even today, we find ourselves drawn to stories that explain our past, define our values, and give meaning to our lives. Whether they are narratives of national identity, tales of personal transformation, or even the grand narratives of scientific discovery itself, we still seek the profound resonance that myth offers. We are, at our core, story-making and story-living creatures. As you drift toward sleep now, perhaps you might carry with you a new appreciation for these ancient, powerful narratives. Remember that a myth is not just a story. It is a fundamental truth, not a fact, but of meaning. It is a gentle whisper from our collective past, guiding us, comforting us, and reminding us of the profound human capacity to create worlds, to find meaning, and to understand ourselves through the beautiful, intricate art of storytelling. May your dreams be peaceful and filled with the quiet wisdom of these timeless tales. Good night.